For more debates, updates, and bonus clips, sign up at thebigconversation.show.
I do think you have to look at the world around you and you have to say there is an immense amount of suffering that goes on, which I don't believe an all-powerful, omniscient, and good, morally good being would permit. Because this is not simply suffering that occurs to those who do bad things. It's not even if you were to believe what I think is a repellent doctrine of original sin, that all humans have sinned because Adam and Eve sinned, and therefore it's okay for us to be punished. Because even if you accept that, non-human animals not being descended from Adam would not have original sin, and yet it's clear that they suffer, and not only at the hands of humans. They suffer because I come from Australia, there's seasonal droughts. Out there in the arid centre of Australia, there are droughts, and many kangaroos and other animals will slowly die of thirst, a miserable death. I cannot for the life of me see why a good God would permit that. So
really, the fact that you can't place these moral duties and values in the framework of God is because there are other aspects of God that you just find can't bring you.
That's
to the
certainly
point.
a major reason for me. I mean, Andrew said objected to extravagant Platonism and seemed to imply that belief in a God is somehow less extravagant. We could have a debate about what creates more metaphysical extravagance, and that would be another issue that we could raise. And also, I still haven't really heard Andrew's answer to the question of whether God is simply, whether the things that God says are good, they could have been different or not. I haven't. I know he said it's something part of the idea of goodness, but then.
Well, let's send this back to you, Andy, because
absolutely.
I think there's a couple of questions there.
There are.
This challenge over whether you can resolve Euthyphro's dilemma and whether God actually does command the good and so on, but also the problem of suffering. Peter says, God's not even on the table as long as the world we're in is the world that God has created, because I can't reconcile that with a God of love, as you seem to be able to.
There's a lot of good things in there, but let's take that latter one, Peter, because I think that's a hugely significant question. And of course, as a philosopher who is no slouch, you'll be aware that there's a whole branch of philosophy that deals with that from a range of perspective, which is the whole branch of philosophy and theology known as theodicy. So I think it'd be interesting to do some digging into that if one's going to use that as an argument. What I find interesting is right from the word go that actually that brings a whole moral dimension to bear on the world that we live in, because of course our instinctive reaction hopefully our instinctive reaction, whether it's kangaroos dying of thirst in the centre of Australia, or whether it's a hurricane or whatever causing some kind of natural disaster, is we don't just view it coldly and dispassionately. We actually bring the ought to bear. It ought not to be like that. The world ought to be different, and that oughtness, as somebody once described, is a bit like the bubble on the wallpaper. You wallpaper a room and there's a bubble over here and you push it down and it pops up over here. We can't seem to avoid making those kind of value judgments. Now, if that was all there was to say, then I think, if the Christian story was simply God is good and has created this world, and hey, isn't it wonderful, then I think we'd have every duty to come along and go, well, hang on just a moment. But of course, that's neither the beginning of the story nor the end of the story. The beginning of the story is that something has gone wrong with creation. With all due respect, Peter, you slightly mischaracterise the Christian doctrine of original sin, which is not the reason the world is in the state it's in, is because God goes, because of Adam and Eve, I'm just going to kill those kangaroos, unless that's that's the AV, the Australian version.
Tell me what the right version is.
Rather than that's actually fundamentally twisted and broken creation, both our relationship with God and creation itself.
But if God is all powerful, why can't he fix it?
I'm so glad you asked that question. Before I get to that, I'd also point out, interestingly, I don't know if you're aware of, one of our most iconoclastic atheist philosophers here in the UK is John Gray, formerly London School of Economics. And John, either in his book Heresies or in Straw Dogs, I always forget which one this is found in, talks about the doctrine of original sin and the fall, and says, much as I disagree with much that Christians have said, he said that's actually the one thing I think Christianity has got right. Just look around you. Human beings are a badly broken animal. Now, your question about why does God allow it? Well, if God had simply sat there in heaven and done nothing about it, then I think we would be able to raise that very charge of going, well, it's all right for you. You're sitting up there in heaven. Life is pretty miserable down here. But of course, the whole of the Christian story is what God has and is doing about it in and through the cross and through Jesus. And whatever you make of Jesus of Nazareth, certainly the heart of the Christian story, you have the ability to go, the one thing you cannot pin on the God of the Bible is this is not a God who knows something, who knows nothing about suffering and injustice. And interestingly, Justin, that brings us full circle. Because one of the things I would also want to bring to the table as a Christian about human value and dignity is that value is also conferred by what somebody is prepared to pay. And in the God of the Bible, and in the cross and in Jesus, you have God making a tremendous statement about the value of human beings.